Hey, this is Jonathan Gilliam. I'm about to start the show, but everybody keeps telling me they want me to make my commercials for my books shorter. But good grief, I feel like it's so important that I have to tell you exactly what these books can do for you. But I'm going to make it shorter, so here goes. Sheep No More, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival. It's a best-selling book. It will teach you how to look at yourself and your life and your business and your home and your school from the attacker's point of view. There's 2 workbooks that go with it, the Threat Assessment Workbook and the Defense Assessment Workbook. Those are fillable with the knowledge that you get out of Sheep No More. And then for the children, The Adventures of Team Little Bigs, a parent's book for children. The children get the book with the pictures. It has all the lessons built into the pictures. And the parents can go to teamlittlebigs.com, download the lesson plans, and then teach their children through the books. There, I did it in under a minute. Let's start the show. This is Jonathan Gilliam back, and on the Experts Podcast, the truth has arrived. So I've got 2 stories I want to talk about today. I'm trying, my hardest not to make this the same show every damn day, but I'm telling you, it is unbelievable, the stuff that's going on. And we keep repeating every day. It's crazier and crazier. One thing I have to say, though, that is starting to become blatantly apparent is that most people in a position of power, I mean, we knew this already, but most people in a position of power have no grasp in the reality of their place in all of these problems. They don't understand that they are one of the main causes of everything that's happening. And they're also the reasons for a lack of effective solutions. So, and it's not just power people that are politicians, This is also people that are CEOs, like the guy who is the Steve Phelps, the CEO of NASCAR. And I'm going to talk about him in just a second, but I want to kind of take from what we talked about yesterday with Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, and that incredibly crazy interview. I don't even think Brett Baier realizes how crazy that interview was. I really don't think he probably even realizes it, but it's the epitome of non-leadership. And the absolute greatest example I think I've listened to in a very long time from somebody that is not a politician, that just gave example after example of out of touch with reality, no effective solutions, not an inkling of understanding of what the job of that agency actually is. And I thought today would be a great example of how that exists on the local level as well. Because, to tell you the truth, I was going to skip today's show this morning. I was going to do it later on this afternoon. But when I was getting ready to go to bed, I do these shows late or early in the morning. It's like 4 o'clock in the morning. Right now it's actually 5:15 a.m. So I'm going to do this show, post it all up, take a nap, get up, start the day again. That's the way I roll. And I was getting ready to go to bed, and I saw this story about Commissioner Dermot Shea from the NYPD. This guy has got to be the goofiest, douchiest dude in law enforcement. I don't know him. I didn't know him before. I don't think I knew him when I was in the FBI. I worked around a lot of chiefs because of the nature of the program that I was running when I was in there, that I ran for a while. But the headline reads this: NYC police. This is from Fox News. It's on the New York Post. It's on several different publications. But the NYC Police Commissioner Dermot Shea says, quote, "Our criminal justice system is imploding." Now, he's not lying about that. He's not lying at all. I mean, as I scroll down, I see his picture. I can't even, how did this guy ever get into this position? He does not scream competent leader. He screams buffoon that would be on a sitcom about, you ever notice on all these sitcoms, the husband's fat and out of shape and the wife is good looking? And they always have this goofy neighbor. That would be Dermot Shea. He's that goofy neighbor. And he sounds goofy when he talks. One thing I've often said over and over again about especially politicians, if you had the opportunity to sit down with 3 people and have a beer or whatever you drink, maybe it's water, and 3 people that you could choose that you could really learn something from, the majority, or not just that you would want to be friends with just based on their character that you've seen, it would not, most likely not be the majority of politicians that we have in any branch of government, for that matter. They're very narcissistic and weird. This guy, Dermot Shea, screams that. And he says this is the story. I'm going to go through the story like I did the interview yesterday. The city's top cop said the criminal justice system was imploding as he highlighted a rise in shootings and killings on the city streets and slammed politicians for refusing to support the finest at an invite-only press conference at NYPD headquarters this week. Okay. So he's going to blame politicians. He's going to blame politicians because he couldn't come up with a way to manage his police department effectively. Regardless of what Big Bird de Blasio communist is saying, this guy can't run the police department in a way that actually makes a difference. Giuliani came in, and along with Bernie Carrick, they had a cop on every corner. There was the Broken Windows initiative where they started punishing people for crimes. And guess what happened? New York City became one of the safest cities in the world, really. And this is the way that progressives work. They come in, instead of repeating what he's doing, they go 180 degrees out and take whatever city they're in right back down into the pit of hell. And so this guy, Dermot Shea, says you have to, quote, "You have to step back and look at this. You have a criminal justice system that is imploding. And then that's the kindest way to put it, imploding, is what he says. I don't think he realizes he's a part of this problem. I really don't think he realizes it. He probably thinks he's really good looking and amazing and an amazing person too. That's the way a lot of these weirdos are. He went on to point out that many criminal cases that were ongoing, stagnant, or deferred were part of the problem. Each one of those represents somebody not being held accountable and no consequences. Kind of similar to the no bail or the no bail reform that passed. So I remember talking to a good friend of mine that was running a precinct, and he showed me a stack of papers that were about a foot high, and he said all those people have been arrested and released today. That's how bad it is. On top of that, they're releasing people with COVID that are in the jails. Instead of trying to isolate COVID patients, I don't understand it. COVID is not, this is the thing about this disease, okay? It's not something as you walk down the hallway that jumps off 10 feet away and starts strangling people until they die right away. Somebody that has COVID or the symptoms of COVID or a new person that comes into the jail could be moved to a location where other people are not. And they couldn't take some of these people and find jails to put them in temporarily that didn't have COVID. That's not possible. No, they released them. They released them into the public. And so now what you have is homicides are up 5%, I think, or a 5-year high. How did I read that? Let me see this again. They're up tremendously is what they are. And let's see here. What is it? 5-year high. Homicides hit a 5-year high. And this knucklehead goes on, Dermot Shea goes on to talk about not just that the criminal justice is imploding, but he skips all the way around the fact that he's in charge of the NYPD and the fact that he is all for defunding the police, over $1 billion, and getting rid of the anti-crime plainclothes unit, which is one of the most important squads in the NYPD. So now there's not going to be anti-crime guys, and auto crime are and their street crime unit. I don't know if they all fall under the same rule that they're going to have to get rid of their plainclothes. I don't know, but those are some of the busiest squads in New York, and they are very effective because they can drive around. I mean, criminals usually know what they look like, but they can still stay a little bit more conspicuous and able to roll up real quick and follow people in a much better fashion. He's going to disband that and put them in uniform. And you see here, this is the same thing they did with stop and frisk years ago. They, stop and frisk, they could stop anybody they suspected of potentially carrying a weapon or up to no good, and they could search them. Well, there's actually a law called the Terry Law that allows them really basically to do that. But for some reason, they wanted to rename it and change it a little bit. And while I guess some would see that as a based on race, because it was primarily in the inner city where a lot of this stuff happened, what they fail to realize is the inner city is where the most victims are as well, and the most crime. So now those victims and the people that live in those areas don't have that security of knowing that a cop can stop anybody anytime in the high crime areas and search them basically to see if they suspect that they're up to something. So not only did they get rid of that, they also told everybody about it, and it made it into a political issue. So now when they got rid of it and celebrated out loud so everybody could know it, the criminals knew that there's no way that they're going to be searched. So they created it just like we do in all these wars. We go over, and these failed generals that all hate Trump, and they're all failed generals. They haven't won anything. I think it's actually a huge compliment that they don't like the president, because incompetent narcissists will never like the people that are a threat to them. And so, that's the way it is. These guys don't like him because he's a threat. But this is how they fought wars for the past 20 years. They go, and more than that, they go in, they identify the dictator or the problem, they remove them, and they leave a gap, a vacuum, and that always gets filled by worse people. That's how we got ISIS. That's, Al Qaeda was born out of that. It just on and on. The instability around the Middle East was increased. It's always there, but it was increased because of this. And this is the way it is with stop and frisk and these other programs, like taking away the plainclothes anti-crime people. I mean, you do these things and you create a void, and that void is taken advantage of by bad people. And this moron doesn't get that, and he also doesn't realize he's in charge. If you run something like the NYPD and you can't figure out how to fix the problems that you're entrusted with the power to fix, then you're probably not qualified for the job, and you should get out of there. As soon as you feel the need to blame politicians, unless there's real proof, and the real proof would have been him saying, I don't agree with anything de Blasio says, because de Blasio is completely lost in everything that he says about law enforcement. He's a complete waste of human flesh, especially when it comes to decision-making process. And if Shea had said, I can't effectively do the job because this guy won't let me, I would have said, okay, now I understand. But that's not what he did. He bent over faster than, very fast. And he just went right along with what this crazy weirdo communist mayor came up with. That's going to affect and fix nothing, as you can see. So it as I read through this, and it wasn't a long article. The other one's actually quite a bit longer. The words that he says, where it quote, each one of those represents somebody not being held accountable and no consequences. He's talking about the criminals. Well, guess what, sunshine? Nobody's holding you accountable either, or de Blasio, or Cuomo for that matter, who's killed, 10,000 elderly people by his bad, terrible decisions, incompetent decisions, choices that he made, knowing that he was putting elderly COVID patients in with elderly non-COVID patients, people who were there for rehab for 2 weeks, and they all died. Stupid. So it's very similar to what you saw yesterday or heard yesterday in the podcast. And if you haven't listened to it, I would definitely listen to it if I was you, because it just jumped off the pages as I listened to this, to the interview with Christopher Wray and Brett Baer on Fox News. And it's like this. It's hard to believe that these people are actually this clueless and in the positions that they're in. But I guess, listen, it's at all levels. This is no surprise for me. You can look at all levels in anywhere. Look at the SEAL teams. Look at the SEAL teams. The probably the most efficient and dangerous, deadly fighting force in the history of mankind. And somehow, some way, all the people at the very top went left. They went into an ideology that is the polar opposite of what it means to be a SEAL. You can't even trust the SEAL teams to be ran by men that understand the dirty, dangerous job that they do. They turn it into politics. Ask Eddie Gallagher about that. So that was the first story. There's going to be more from this knucklehead. He's such a whiner. He reminds me of I don't know what this comedian's name was. He was on Seinfeld, and he kept asking Lorraine out on Seinfeld, if you remember. And he's kind of a whiner. He talks like this. And that's the way this Dermot guy is. He's, the whole justice system's imploding. It's imploding. That's the kindest way I can put it. And he says each one of those represents somebody not being held accountable and no consequences. So bad. He's such an idiot. Ugh. I just scrolled by his picture again. Okay, this other story. They probably think I'm obsessed with this because I keep slamming Bubba Wallace and Steve Phelps from NASCAR. But let me just tell you, it is a personal note for me. It's a personal note because my father died when he was 41. And I was 13. I can't say that, look, he had an incredibly high IQ. He was like 160 IQ, but he was a failure his whole life. He was spoiled by his mom spoiled by his dad and verbally abused by his mom, telling him that he would never amount to anything. So he was torn his whole life, and it wasn't a great success. Was not a great success at all. And as a person, you have to come to terms with those things, because you can't go through life, especially if your parents were not that great. You need to accept that in your life and accept that truth and roll on and make the most out of yourself. Luckily for me, I had and still have an incredible mom who cares the world about her kids and always pushed us to be the best that we can be. And lucky for her, they got divorced when I was very young. So I was like 9, but then he died when I was 13. But the one thing that I had, with him was NASCAR, because he grew up in North Carolina where NASCAR is from, and he raced on dirt and, was a reporter on the radio for a while. So he covered NASCAR, and he just lived, eat and breathed NASCAR. Loved it. And this is back when NASCAR was like, actually stock car racing. And 43 was my favorite number. 43 was Richard Petty's number. And I'm not kidding you. The first time I went to the Daytona 500 and they brought out these historic cars and drove them around the track. And I remember from all the way up in the stands, I went there with my partner who was an NYPD detective when I was on a criminal squad. And we went down there. And I remember seeing that Richard Petty, that red, that unique red and blue of that car, and that 43, when it pulled out and started up and it started driving around the track. I mean, I was kind of embarrassed. Luckily, I had sunglasses on because tears just started rolling down my eyes. I mean, I'm about to get choked up about it now, thinking about it. It was the one thing, even my first bicycle that I ever really made, that he helped me with, when he was he already had cancer. He helped me build this bicycle, and I put the number 43 on it. And I remember, it was a good lesson that Bubba Wallace and NASCAR should understand. I was when I was building that bicycle, and I put a seat post in it, and I couldn't get that seat post down in there. So I took a hammer and I was just hammering the crap out of it. I think I was 11 or 12. And then I couldn't get the seat post to adjust anymore. And he came and he said, "Listen, this is a big lesson for you. If something doesn't fit, you can't force it to fit. You got to find a way to, maybe you heat the pole up where it goes in there and you bend it back, or you find a smaller pole to get it down in there. But you don't force it, because if you force it, it's not meant to be there. It's not meant to be there. And if you force something, it's going to cause more problems than if you figure out how to make it work." And, Bubba Wallace and NASCAR need to take that and incorporate that in the way that they think. If they think that there's this massive racial issue in NASCAR, well, then they need to take a step back and realize it's not the fans. It's not the fans that do that. If they think there's such a big problem in NASCAR, which I'm here to tell you there's not, okay, there's not, then they should have approached them. They should have met with themselves and said, what is the problem here? Why are there no more, minority drivers, for instance, or female drivers? I mean, here's the truth. You have to be a really good driver to get to the NASCAR level, okay? The other truth is that you have to be very rich. There are no poor NASCAR drivers. They are all rich. So when you I don't know where this lack of inclusion is, because it's not. I've been out there and camped out at these NASCAR events, and yes, there were Confederate flags, but what they don't understand, and what many people have who just hate that flag because of what it represented, many years ago. It actually morphed into a symbol of the South. That's why it's in many of the state flags. Clinton was from Arkansas. He had it on his campaign buttons. And it is a symbol of pride for the South, not because of racism, but because people are from the South, and yes, the country was split in two at that point, and below the Mason-Dixon line, that's where they flew that flag. And so, but people, I can understand how they think that that's a symbol of racism, but it's not. It's not a symbol of racism for the majority of people at NASCAR. Now, that's the way I feel about it, right? Other people may be offended. Bubba Wallace said that he isn't really concerned about it. He's concerned about the checkered flag. That's what he said. Those are his words. But for some reason, Bubba Wallace and NASCAR decided to go crazy in the virtue signaling and the quote unquote, the anger because of the lack of inclusion in NASCAR and the racism that is rampant. I don't think any of these people have ever come over and talked to the crowd and asked them, what does that flag mean to you? You know, if somebody was offended by it, would you take it down? And they may say no, but that's really their right. It's a form of expression, and no different than that knucklehead years ago that I remember that, and I don't agree with this, but he dipped a crucifix into his urine, put it in a bottle filled with urine, and played that off as art. And, you know, that's just an offensive thing that he's doing just to get popular is what that is. But it was protected. And by the Constitution, I guess. Although I'm sure that the founding fathers probably would have beat him down severely. But the point is, if you force things to happen without trying to understand what's really going on and trying to come to a good solution, you're going to cause more problems for yourself, for your fans, for your business than you would have if you just stopped and had a conversation, went out and met those people and asked them and sat down with them and saw that they aren't racist. Now, some guy responds, because I posted all this stuff about NASCAR. He says he disagreed with me because he's been out there in the fields where these people are camping. I mean, listen, some of these NASCAR events get 200,000-300,000 people at these events, and a tremendous amount of them are camping in RVs just across like the street, and there's be fields or something right there. Sometimes if it's a field as big like Daytona, they may camp on the inside actually. But I personally have never seen the racism. This guy said he's seen it. He said he's heard people, you know, saying things, and I don't know if he has or not, because a lot of these people on Twitter are trolls, and they'll just say that stuff just to get a rise out of people, or they're leftists and they'll lie. They'll just say it. You know, when it turns out he probably just saw the Confederate flag and he thought it was racist, and the people that had it up were intending to be racist, which was not usually. I've never seen that as the case. So what I responded to him was, if you go to any state fair around the country that is located close to the inner city, which a lot of them are for some strange reason, what you're going to see is some of the worst people in the United States. Racist people, black and white, trashy. But you know what? It's always going to be there. And it's not just NASCAR. And you're not going to change those people. You may not make them feel welcome. You may change the rules where they can't come there and wear what they want to wear. They may not ever come back. And a lot of them, and that's just a select few. That's just a select few of people that probably actually feel any type of racial hate towards Bubba Wallace. I mean, he's not a great driver. So I don't think most people give him a thought at all. Before this, he was relatively unknown, even though he was as he keeps pointing out, the only black driver in NASCAR. But nobody really cared because he wasn't good and isn't good. You know, Kyle Busch, that guy can drive. He looks like something from outer space, but he can drive. Jimmy Johnson, that guy can drive. Dale Earnhardt never added up to his dad, and he's a total leftist, so I don't really care about Dale Earnhardt Jr. But For those of you that don't follow NASCAR, I would have begged and pleaded you to go to a race so you could see the reality of what it's actually like. Cars doing, almost 200 and sometimes over 200 miles an hour. And when they go by, they're I'm not kidding you, they're 30 feet away from you when they go by, and they're doing 200 miles an hour, and you can feel it, smell it. The wind hits you. It is so loud that you can't talk. You have to wear headsets or earplugs. And it's just an amazing, overwhelming experience. And they've ruined it. They've ruined it because of the same nonsense that you see with Dermot Shea from the NYPD and from Christopher Wray and the FBI. Totally out of touch with reality, and they do not see what's actually happening in this country. And they're just strictly blaming all this on people who have white skin. And as I always say, I hate saying black and white. I don't feel comfortable with it. It doesn't say anything about the character of who somebody is. But they chose that. That's the thing that's the hill they want to die on. That's what just like all these people with the mask, they just cannot let that go. Don't wear a mask. I keep seeing all these things posted on Facebook, and I want to smack people when I see that. It's a real virus. If you wear a mask, you're wearing it for me. And if I wear one, I'm wearing it for you. But these people think it's some kind of constitutional violation to have to put on a mask and be responsible. So as I read through this, it is astonishingly arrogant and out of touch. So this is NASCAR President Steve Phelps. This comes off of Yahoo Sports. And he's quoted here saying that the noose found in the garage of Bubba Wallace, quote, was real. And while the series' only black driver was targeted in a hate crime, targeted in a hate crime, officials' concern for him was warranted. Now, that's what Steve Phelps is saying. He's saying that it was a real noose, and the series' only black driver wasn't targeted, but the officials' concern for him was warranted. Why? Why are they so concerned with Bubba Wallace? Because of the Confederate flag? I don't think anybody's going to kill him over the Confederate flag. I would think people don't like Bubba Wallace because he's a narcissistic, loudmouth, bad driver. And this guy, Steve Phelps, comes out and says it was a noose. Well, it wasn't a noose. A noose is something you put around somebody's neck to hang them. This was a knot that was tied so that you could grab a garage door and close the damn thing. And it wasn't big enough it could maybe fit around a 5-year-old's neck. They've released a picture of it. It's actually a very well-tied knot. And they keep talking about, we don't know who did it. We're looking. Why are you looking? Somebody there was one of them. They did a bunch of searches of all the garages. They found one other. Some of them are just ropes hanging. Some of them had a knot tied in it, like a ball that you could pull down. It's just how you close a garage door, and somebody's efficient at tying knots. And they equated this because another person who was black on Bubba Wallace's team saw it and flipped his shit and went and told Bubba Wallace and NASCAR that somebody tied a noose over Bubba Wallace's garage door. I mean, you want to talk about going from nothing to 1,000% because you're assuming that somebody else did that for the wrong reasons. It doesn't work like that, especially in a controlled environment. Somebody who would tie a noose for the purpose of it being a noose and showing somebody who's black is, I can guarantee you, they are not going to be able to hide their racism on a daily basis, and everybody will say, oh, it was that guy because he's a total racist. If you're going to do something that stupid, you're either a teenager that doesn't realize what you're doing, or you're a full-blown racist. If your intent is to harass or scare a black car driver or crew member. But apparently that was not the intent. It was just a door pull. And so so this crew member goes in the garage and sees this thing and doesn't think to himself, that's just a door pull. He doesn't think that. He automatically thinks this is a racial issue. He doesn't go and look at any other doors. He doesn't, he doesn't do any due diligence himself, apparently. Goes straight to these guys and tells them there's a noose hanging over the car. They don't do that either. They don't wait and pull cameras. That's all the FBI did, by the way, was pull cameras. They don't wait for that. They didn't say, let's pause and see if this has anything to do with, no. They immediately assumed it was a noose, not a slip knot, or a uni knot, whatever you want to call it. They immediately assumed that it was a racist that did it, and they immediately assumed that Bubba Wallace was a target. None of which was true. But what it shows you is that they are completely out of touch with reality, and they are quick to call the race card out and say, somebody's guilty here. Somebody who's white is definitely guilty here. They're white. He goes on to say he had a conference call with reporters on Thursday to discuss the findings of NASCAR's own investigation. Okay, they pulled the cameras too into the matter. 2 days after the FBI concluded the noose fashioned from a garage pull-down rope had been in place in Talladega Speedway garage for months and could not have been aimed at Wallace. And it seems like Wallace and NASCAR just don't want to believe that. They do believe it, but they just think it still must have had some type of hate behind it because you just don't tie that knot. Well, a lot of people do tie that knot. It's the most popular knot in fishing, actually. The conclusion sparked suggestions on social media that the entire incident was a hoax, angering Wallace and prompting Phelps to defend NASCAR's reaction. Now, I don't think it was a hoax. I think it was people who were overreacting because they literally either see themselves as a victim or they have a false realization on the fact of what racism actually is in this country. And it's less of hatred and more of distrust because of the crime and violence and the killing that comes out of the inner city. That's promoted in rap music, that's promoted in movies. So he says, upon learning and seeing the noose, our initial reaction was to protect our driver. Why? Your initial reaction wasn't that, well, let's see, it's attached to the garage door. If the door was closed, this would be on the ground, probably outside. Who had this garage before? Was it there then? Can we find a camera and see if it was there then? So that wasn't their response. Their initial reaction was to protect the driver, assuming that people in NASCAR are racist. Because, folks, it was a highly controlled area. You're not going to get into the garage area at Talladega or Daytona or anywhere else without having a pass and being a VIP. You don't just go up and say, I'd like to have a pass to the garage. It's not like that. He goes on to say, we're living in a highly charged and emotional time. Gee, I wonder why. Maybe it's because of people like you, Steve Phelps, that are going around instigating these things. I mean, what's next? Somebody's eating one of those Magnum chocolate ice cream cones, and somebody sees it and reports that somebody was eating something that's dark, and it must be racist because it was a white person and they were trying to get to the white center of the ice cream. Are you going to believe that and make that into a racial thing? Are you going to start running, take the color off the cars and make them all just black because you don't want to offend people, and you're assuming that because a race car has white on it, it must be a racial statement? That's about how stupid this is. He said what we saw was a symbol of hate. This is so profound, folks, right? He says, we're living in a highly charged emotional time. What we saw was a symbol of hate and was only present in one present in one area of the garage, and that was of the 43 car of Bubba Wallace. But still, their first reaction was to look at a knot and say that's a symbol of hate. They didn't look at it and say that's attached to the garage door, probably just a handle that somebody tied so they can pull it down. Who had this garage before? Have you guys ever seen this before? Who had the garage last time? Did you see this? Not that anybody would have even noticed it. That's the other thing. Nobody noticed it since 2019. Why? Because nobody ties up a freaking noose and throws it and leaves it in a place like that. I'm sorry. Yes, it has happened. My apologies. Jesse Smollett did it, right? And that was a lie, saying that they put a noose around his neck before he went to the police precinct. All made up. You can't even, I'm listening to these stories. I know several people who have hung themselves. Well, I only know two, but I know several people who have found other people hanging. Seems to be a way that people are killing themselves these days. I don't know why. But every time you hear a story about a black person who's hung themselves, their family and friends and the newspapers automatically assume that it was a racial crime and they were killed. This world, basically the only thing that happens like that in this country is gang on gang violence. And that is very bad. I've seen some brutal stuff, especially the Mexican cartels. I've seen some really, really bad stuff. Point where they're, skinning people alive and keeping them doped up so they don't die. And it's horrific. I mean, they're doing stuff on the level of ISIS. But this guy immediately sees a symbol of hate. You've got a problem if that's what you're seeing immediately. I mean, I would hope that you're not going through life seeing everybody as being against you. That's a horrible way to live, especially after the success of making it to NASCAR and proving that you can be black and rich. Unfortunately, not a successful driver, but actually be in NASCAR. He goes on to say, in hindsight, I should have used the word alleged in our statement. Well, maybe you shouldn't have said anything at all. Maybe you should have looked into it and given it, 24 hours to figure out what it was. Had your security gurus go in there and pull cameras, asked people about it, and then just left it alone. But no, that's not what you did. You had to make it front news. You had to march him down with everybody else as though everybody is like accepting that NASCAR is so racist, all these drivers, and you've turned it into a spectacle. He goes on to say, as you can see from the photo, the noose was real, as was the concern for Bubba. Again, it wasn't. It was not a noose. They keep saying the noose was real. It's not a noose. It's a knot. A noose is something that you put around someone's head to hang them. This was something to pull a garage door down. And it was attached to a garage door, not a weight-supporting beam so they could put somebody in it. And it was not sitting in a place where it would make sense to put it. I mean, I don't know. If somebody is dumb enough and racist enough to put a noose down somewhere, that why wouldn't they just put it in the car or put it on the ground with some kind of racial slur there? No, they're going to tie it. They're going to tie the garage door into a knot, a tiny little noose that's about as big as your hand. They're really going to send a message then. Neither the FBI investigation nor NASCAR probe found who tied the noose. See, that's what they're looking for. They're actually looking to hang somebody. But Phelps said their investigation confirmed it was not a normal appearance in a trackside garage. NASCAR officials asked each track to sweep through their respective garages across 1,684 garage stalls at 29 tracks. NASCAR found only 11 total that had a pull rope even tied in a knot. Only one featured a rope tied into a noose. The garage stall used by Watson last week. Again, he keeps saying tied into a noose. It was tied into a slip knot. Phelps said NASCAR would implement. This almost makes me ill hearing this. Phelps said NASCAR would implement sensitivity and unconscious bias training for all members of the industry, along with additional sweeps through garage areas and installations of additional cameras in all garages. There's no hope. You can't change. You can't change stupidity like this. Let me just go back and touch on this, and so you can see the reality of this. Someone along the way tied a sophisticated knot, a slip knot, and they tied it really well, about as big as your hand, so that you could pull the garage door down. They didn't think anything about it. It was just a knot. They knew how to tie it, and it gives it a handle so you can pull the garage door down. About a year later, somebody who just happens to have dark skin comes in and sees this thing, does not look at what it's attached to, and assumes, and I can't figure out why all these people are assuming it was a racially motivated thing, because Bubba Wallace is black. I would get that if Bubba Wallace was in an environment where racism was rampant, but he's not. That guy goes and tells Bubba Wallace. He goes and tells the NASCAR. NASCAR brings in the FBI, who bring down 15 agents and do this investigation to find what NASCAR could have found. Then they go, after they determine it was not a noose, and they determine it was not done intentionally to hurt anyone or demean anybody or threaten anyone. It's just a garage door pull. After they found that out, that no one did anything intentionally wrong, Steve Phelps, the president of NASCAR, decided that they would implement sensitivity and unconscious bias training. In other words, you sneeze wrong and it offends somebody, you need to go to a course to learn how to sneeze different. How is any bias unconscionable or unconscious? How is that even possible? I guess I don't like you. I didn't know that, but I was sending unconscious symbols. Stupid. There's no such thing as unconscious bias. I don't care what scientist or psychologist or activist says. Bias is based on hate or a disagreement in the way that person lives or is, and that's a conscious decision. Bias is a conscious decision. There is no unconscious bias. But they're going to go through the training for that. and all members of the industry, along with additional sweeps to the garage area, to install additional cameras in the garages. So to make sure nobody else makes slip knots for door pull downs. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I hope they don't have any water coolers with those little cups that look like the KKK masks, also known as a cup, a paper cup, the ones that go into a cone. If somebody sees that, they may think that, well, that's a racial statement. Somebody put these little figures of KKK a mask up on next to the water cooler. That's how stupid this is. Have you ever seen anybody normal that said they were in the KKK? They're all freaking weirdos. I mean, I've never seen any of these people that look like they are. They all look like they have severe mental issues, inbred, something. I don't know what it is. They're not this sophisticated. He says, Steve Phelps, president of NASCAR, says, our ultimate conclusion for this investigation, I'm going to say it like he probably thinks he sounds. Our ultimate conclusion for this investigation is to ensure that this never happens again, that no one walks by a noose without recognizing the potential damage it could do, Phelps said. So, okay. If you walk by a knot that's tied very nicely, by the way, you are to assume it's a racial thing. You are to assume that it may cause somebody else issues. And if you don't assume that, then you're a racist and you have unconscious bias. That's how stupid this is. Our ultimate conclusion, he says, let me go over this again, for this investigation is to ensure that this never happens again. What? What? You're making sure that what never happens again? Garage pull down door or ropes are nowhere in place anymore? Are you just going to leave the garage doors open or put electric garage doors on there? Damn these ropes. Or are you going to make and ensure that you all don't flip the F out and accuse the fans and people in NASCAR that are white of being racist? That's not what you're talking about, though, is it, Steve Phelps? The story goes on to say Wallace has played a key role in recent weeks in prompting NASCAR to finally implement a ban on the Confederate flag at race venues. The story goes on to say, seen as a symbol of slavery and racism by many. So, because that's what we do now. You know, if something is seen as bad by somebody else, then you have to get rid of it. Instead of those people coming and having a conversation and realizing what it means to other people. I mean, the Dukes of Hazzard, I think I talked about this already. The Dukes of Hazzard, you know, that was on the top of their car. They were anti-cop. They weren't racist. It was just the Southern way, the Southern symbol. Ew. Courage and dignity. That's what they go on to say. Courage and dignity. Man. He went on to say, this is so funny. I'm reading through this as I'm talking. Phelps said he was proud to see so many stand up for what's right. What? What is right? That you're supposed to freak out and assume that people are racist? That's what's right? That you're supposed to assume that somebody was threatening Bubba Wallace? I think that's what security is for. That's what they're for. Why should you assume any of this stuff? Unless you live in an environment that is just oppressively racist. You're just going to go through and and assume that that's the case. And Steve Phelps says he's proud to see so many stand up for what is right. What is right? He says Bubba Wallace and the 43 team had nothing to do with this. Bubba has done nothing but represent this sport with courage, class, and dignity, and he stood tall for what he believes in. And we all need to stand with him. Well, listen, I'm not standing with Bubba Wallace. I'm not. Because Bubba Wallace is not a victim, and he's not oppressed. Bubba Wallace is a freaking rich dude who gets to drive NASCAR freaking amazing technologically advanced cars around a track. Obviously not win, but he gets to do that for a living. He doesn't want for anything. So no, I'm not going to stand with him, because you know what's happening? This is a perfect example of what's going on in the rest of the country. It doesn't matter if they're white or black. If they're left, they are bullying everyone else in this country to conform. And it has nothing to do with George Floyd's death. It has nothing to do with fixing the real issue behind racism in this country, which is the inner city. They're not doing anything to clean that up. They're not doing anything to change the culture of fatherless children. Trying to figure out why everywhere the Democrats rule, black people are oppressed and die at a massive rate from killing each other. They're not going to figure that out. Bubba Wallace wants to do something like that. I will stand with that guy. He wants to leave NASCAR because he's no good at it. I'll freaking help him move his stuff out. He wants to stay and compete and train hard and win races. I'm still not going to watch NASCAR. If he wasn't such a jerk and didn't try to bully all the fans and make himself the center of this victimization that is not happening to him at the just killing the love of the sport that people have. All this stuff is occurring. All these, the sensitivity training, the way that they speak about the rampant racism in NASCAR, it all has to do with the fans. And I'm sure Steve Phelps is sitting up there in his rich palace, and Bubba Wallace assumed that a fan got in there and stuck that in because they're all racist to them, or somebody who is racist and hates Bubba Wallace that works on one of the teams. And you see, it wasn't true, and none of that is true. And quite frankly, I'm absolutely at my wit's end, because I'm seeing good people lose their jobs for doing nothing but giving their opinion about the craziness of what's going on, or support for the president, and they're being called racist. It's like the word hero. You hear everybody's a hero nowadays. Listen, there's so many heroic acts in the environments that I've been in that never get noticed, because real heroes don't really care about the recognition. The real heroes are people that wake up and serve, and they do the best of their ability. They don't look for a bonus. They're not looking for recognition. They step up and they do amazing things. That's a hero. But that word is used way too much. And it's the same thing here. The word racism has gotten completely out of control to a point where good people that don't have a racist bone in their body are being condemned because of the same mindset that Steve Phelps and Bubba Wallace have. So what we're seeing in this country is that people in these executive positions or in these high positions or loud positions like activists, or Steve Phelps, the president of NASCAR, and Bubba Wallace, the one black driver in NASCAR, what you're seeing is that they are assuming that white people are just racist. They're assuming that when there's a knot tied on a garage door that looks like a noose, but it's actually a slip knot, that it must be a noose, and it must have been to intimidate the black driver in NASCAR. As they found out, it wasn't the case. But it's that jump into a conclusion because they assume all these white people are racist. That is the real problem. They are not focusing on fixing the inner city, changing the environment and the culture, and bringing law enforcement and the people together. That's not what they do. I'm Jonathan Gilliam. This is The Experts. The truth has arrived. Peace. We're out of here. Happy Friday.